Welcome back to Truth Talk, and we're excited to be talking about episode 5 of Leadership out of Homer's Iliad. And again, thank you, Andrew Bentley, for joining us.
Yes, sir.
And so a little bit on book 16, Achilles loses it at book 9 and really never gains the momentum to lead. And so in book 16, what's interesting to me is he has his very, very best friend, okay? And his very best friend, they grew up together, they've been boyhood friends. He dies, okay? Unnecessarily, number one. And number two, he dies because he is sent into a battle that his leader won't join. Okay, so this point of interest is interesting to me because Achilles vows, I'll never get involved unless this happens, ensuring that he doesn't get involved. But he recognizes that even as distant and disconnected as he is powerful as a leader because he understands the insignia and the trappings of leadership. And so he invests on his best friend, his own armor, and says, listen, they will freak out basically when they see you because they will think that you're me, right? And you'll win and do great. But whatever you do, do not fight Hector, the hero of the Trojans. Save him for me. I'm the only one that gets that prize, okay? So here we have a bit about Achilles, who is sending someone else where he will not go himself. That's a real issue. I've heard a lot of sermons like this. I'm going to sit here in the air conditioning. You guys go knock doors. I'm going to do this while you guys go sell candy or whatever it is. There is a certain part of leadership that has to lead from the trenches. And if it doesn't lead from the trenches, it's going to cause a welt on that leader that's going to show up in book 16 and 18 and 17. And it's going to show you that, man, that comes back around and gets you every time. What do you have to say towards the idea of leadership that hems itself in so it doesn't have to go out in the trenches?
Well, the first part, of course, you can't lead where you won't go. And I think we all understand that as leaders, that we have to have had that experience or at least be prescient enough to know what the future holds as we lead forward with people in our care. But to lead where you have never been, to lead where you have no vision, to lead where you have no experience is the kiss of death, I would think, for any leader. And I think that's pretty clear within lots of examples. Jamie and yourself, you spoke about the death zone a few podcasts ago, and this idea of Everest when you get into this death zone. And there's so many great stories out of Everest about people who tried to lead either well or poorly. And this idea of conditional leadership and how do I operate in an environment where it's dynamic, where there are a lot of moving parts? How do I lay down rules in order to lead people in a highly dynamic environment? I think leaders have to ask themselves, the environment that I'm working in, how much complexity is there? How much uncertainty is there? And then based upon that uncertainty, that will create for me how much condition I can create around the guidance that I provide for those in my care.
That's very good. And that is the tension between all of it is what do I need to do out in front and what do I need to do to send others? There is a balance between where a general is or where a leader is. And if he's not where he is supposed to be, it causes a lot of unnecessary time spent worrying about unnecessary things from the followership, right? So you have this example here where Patroclus is so baffled by what would possess you to not lead and to sit this great opportunity for leadership, why would you sit it out? That he starts imagining, and this is a sad part of the book to me, he's imagining there is a prophecy that I'm unaware of, right? There's got to be a secret that the information I don't get, because he's gauged and measured his leader's offense, the offended level of Achilles, and he says that's not bad enough to hold you back. It might be bad enough to make you pitch a fit. It might be bad enough to make you scream and rip his head off, like Diomedes and Odysseus, and even Nestor's done it, right? And Patroclus is like, I get that, but it's not bad enough for you to send me, your best friend, to die alone. You're offended, but when I measure it, it's not that bad. So he imagines some fantasy prophecy that surely this is the reason why, that somehow God has forbade you and you just won't tell us all that. To which Achilles answers, enough, wear my armor and go out, and they'll think that you're me, right? So what about the followership that has to try to fill in the blanks? That's got to be a challenge for a follower, to try to come up with a reason. And what should a follower do when the reason why we're sitting out the game isn't good enough? Well, what should they do to approach a leader, or to make a decision in themselves to say, I'm not wasting my time trying to figure that out?
At the risk of fatiguing our listeners, leading up, right? That communication, I need more clarity. I'm not sure I understand the outcome we're trying to achieve. I'm not sure I have a clear understanding of all the resources that I have available to me for success. Right? I can't stress enough that those people who want to lead have to be great followers. And followership starts with that ability to be able to communicate up. It's easy to communicate down. Go do this, go do that, if that's your style of leadership. Mm-hmm. But the real challenge of communication is leading up. How do I connect with my leader and communicate effectively with my leader to say, I need clarification? And he doesn't do that well, I don't think, in that regard.
Okay. That's helpful. And each episode kind of carries forward the same theme, and I want it to be that way, because I want anyone who's picking up the theme to say in their mind, leading up is something I need to read about.
Yes.
I need to grow that in my mind. Is there any, you can come back to this later on as you're thinking about in the back of your mind, is there any books that you could recommend, or lectures or anything on the subject and material of leading up?
Yeah, if you just Google leading up, there will be a book called Leading Up that will give you that insight. And I think everyone, leader or follower, should read and understand what the essentially the ingredients or the characteristics of those people that lead up well.
Okay. So in the book, this book, Achilles sends his best friend out, and Achilles captains of his boat, 2,500 men, 5 captains. They run across and they follow Ajax, who's one bad dude, into the melee with Hector. And Hector is unbelievably strong. He's kind of a archetypal listening leader who does a lot of stuff, and then someone gets to him right at the last minute and says, better plan. And he's like, you're on my team? Well, great. Me listening to you makes me look good. And so he surrounds himself with smart people. And so he sees Achilles come out on the field, what he assumes is Achilles. It's Patroclus in Achilles' armor, and his advisors say to him, back off during the heat of the rally. So in other words, for 9, 15, 16, 17 books, Achilles has not showed up. He's now out on the battlefield, so everyone thinks, right? And they're telling him, back off, because they are going to eat your lunch, basically, because they're going to rally because they think he's finally come to the battle. So Hector flees the battlefield. This kind of, is a bit of a boon to them. But you have to realize that Hector being able to listen to someone of where to spend his energy, his resources, both human and material, he never got indignant when someone helped him prioritize. I love Hector. I love it. When they come and say, you are so valuable, don't give yourself at this point. Hold back. He was like, okay, I see that, right? What is it about leaders? Let's just tap on this while we're running through. What is it about leaders that don't like people to talk to them about where to prioritize resources?
That's an interesting question. The negative side of that to me seems that these people, it's probably they may be an ego issue in the sense that, I've set out the agenda. This is how we're going to do it. There's only one way to do things. This is the prescription on how we're going to do it. That's fatal as a leader. Right? There are thousands of ways to do everything. And if you're so prescriptive as a leader that there's an exact way that people have to do that, you have limited the output, the capacity of those that are actually executing what the goal and what the strategy is. It's a fatal flaw in leadership to be so prescriptive.
And how does Bishop King say that Brother Terry would ask him, how's it growing or something? Do you remember that story? And he would say, we're doing this. And
I don't.
Brother Terry would say something like, well, that's a way to grow. And he would say, well, and then we're doing this. And Brother Terry would say, and that's another way.
Yeah.
He said, that's not the way. It's a way. I think sometimes leadership gets their own ego and identity kind of wrapped up in this stuff. And when I heard one person explain the Napoleonic complex is, if you reject my idea, you reject me. And that's a danger, because that's going to make you just stop up your ears and you're deaf, because it's not just a bad idea. It's a bad me, right? Which is different than a bad idea.
Yeah.
So
Can I just say, autobiographically is, I'm fond of saying I haven't met an idea I don't love. And so I can generate a lot of ideas, and I love ideas, but I'm also aware that 99% of my ideas are not great at first blush, that all of them need polishing, all of them need reconsidering them, all of them need experience, all of them need point of view. And so that to me is the value of having people surrounding the strategy, the thing that we're trying to actually execute. The value is having people that can take my ideas and can polish them, that can provide the strategy, that can provide the logistics, that can provide the execution, that can even provide better clarity on the idea itself. It's so, so important.
Yeah, that is valuable. It's very valuable. So as we move along in this story, because Agamemnon's really never went to the battlefield, he just talk. I mean, we're at book 16, and something's about ready to happen that's not happened in all the rest of the pages. I mean, like on my book, I'm at page 430, and the first hero in the story dies, the first big guy. All the main characters are still alive. That's how much talk is, like you say, at the expense of wearying our listener. Homer doesn't care. 16 books they've been talking, right? And they've waded in and fought a few skirmishes and killed a few nobodies. But Patroclus, wearing Achilles' armor, Hector pulls out. He kills this guy named Sarpedon, okay? And, the Trojans just go into absolute mourning, and they rally around. And so there's an escalation in the story and the narration here. And so all the other people are still wanting to do what we've done for 16 books. Talk, right? So I love this line. He says, the famous horseman now shall have death. You've laid your life, and Patroclus, now nerved for battle, dressed him down. Meriones, brave as you are, why bluster on this way? Trust me, my friend, you'll never force the Trojans back from this corpse with a few stinging taunts. Earth will bury many men that talk. Come and prove the battle is in action. Proof of words is not debate. No time for speeches now. It's time to fight. So Patroclus shows this ability to put his finger on the pulse and say, okay, enough strategizing, enough banter. Yeah. Now's the time for action. That's an amazing gift a leader has. Because if not, you fall into this state of, what do they call it? An analysis paralysis, yep, where you're just paralyzed by the plan and you never implement it. And Patroclus shows amazing courage to lead, and he's only been in the leadership thing for like 3 pages. Right. That's a gift, isn't it?
It's an incredible gift. I think when I look at my own leadership, where I am probably most critical of my capability is around execution. I can generate ideas all day long, and ideas are great, and people can get excited, and lots of waving the hands and big speeches that leaders are so good at often. But it's the execution that matters most. Getting things done.
And Patroclus gets that. I mean, right from it's refreshing, isn't it? To be under somebody like, and this, I would encourage any saint who is coming out of any secular, genre or sector where it's a lot of analyzation. You're going to follow a pastor and a leadership team. They're going to have a plan, but they're going to be much more ready to execute than the average middle-level management in corporate North America. Would you say?
I think so. I think so. I think leaders are unique, though. There are a lot of leaders that are great at casting a vision. They're great at telling the story. They're great at being motivational. It's hard to be a great logistician. Like the logistics of getting things done, the ability to understand, what are the swim lanes that have to be maintained? What is it that we're actually trying to accomplish? Like, what is the outcome that we're truly looking for? And then what are the steps in order to achieve that? It's a unique gift to do that. And I'm action-oriented, but I'm not great at the execution and the logistics and the layout and the discipline around all of those moving parts. I'm fascinated by people who do that well.
Yeah, it's interesting, that gift, that talent, and to be able to jump on your horse and ride when it's time to ride in the followership context takes a unique gift as well. Yep. Because you've got to put your neck out there a bit. You've got to spend money to make money. You've got to spend money to put on an event. And if you have people that are just frozen, right, it takes a unique gift to say now's the time for action. And that's helpful. Leaders are benefited by people who, when it's time to ride, they get on their horses and ride with you. Yeah. So Hector and Patroclus get into this deal. Patroclus sees that they've done something, and he wades in. In fact, in line 9-10, he kills 27 men just stepping across the ditch. I mean, it's near superhuman, right? And I love how Homer puts it, screaming his savage cry, 3 times he killed 9 men. I love that line. It's just so perfectly written. Anyhow, he gets too close to Hector, and he figures, I'll take him. And Hector takes him and stabs him, and the story begins to unravel, and he dies, and the rest of Hector taunts him as he dies. This is horrifying to me. And I could literally, we don't have time to do it, but I could stop and we could have about 2 hours discussion on this. Because really, this is the point of this book, is it ever right for a follower to question, is this an unjust war? Is this, that's really what this is about, right? And in dying for a cause not worthy of my life, am I really attaining to glory because I died in a bitter cause, right? So there's that tension in the story. But Hector says, you poor doomed man, not for all his power could Achilles save you now. And how he must have filled your ears with orders as you went marching out and the hero stayed behind. Now don't come back to the hollow ships you hear. Patroclus, you master horseman, not till you've slashed the shirt around his chest and soaked it in the blood of man-killing Hector. So he must have commanded, you maniac, you obeyed. Like, that is so powerful, Andrew, because here lies a dying man. If he doesn't believe in his cause, bigger than his leader. And I think that's the beauty of followers who understand that while the leader may be drunk on the leader's identity, they are not fighting for that leader. There's a greater cause in their bosom. And that's beauty to me. That's the poetry of all this. And so he dies while they taunt him. And Patroclus to me is a hero's hero, a man among men. Not because he is perfect, not because his battle's perfect, but because of the dignity he has that's bigger than the faults he finds in his leaders. Anything you want to weigh in on that at the end of the book?
I would maybe go back to the beginning and just double click on the wearing Achilles' armor. And I think from a leadership perspective, there's all of us have to think about this. We are not trying to create mini-me's, right? This idea of I'm sending you out as me. And the scripture says, 2 Timothy 3:14, to continue in the things that you have learned of me. And I think the operative word in that is that you have learned. And that learning process it's the receiving of information, but it's the synthesis of that, or synthesizing that information into your own personality, into your own set of experiences. And ultimately, as leaders, we are looking for people who will continue in the faith, that will continue the things that you have learned of me, but they will continue in the way that you have learned them, that you will synthesize them in the way that's unique to you. And that as we send out people who are followers of us to continue the mission, that they go in their own anointing, that they go in their own unique capability and their own mandate given to them by God. And I'd hate for us to lose sight of the fact that that error of giving him the armor, kind of like Saul with David, right? Here, take my armor. No.
Right.
Your armor isn't me and I'm not you.
Right. So he, in line 1000, he dies crying out Achilles' name. That's the last thing that comes out of Patroclus' mouth. And I wrote a few notes here in the margin of the wrap-up of this book. What a man this Patroclus is, to lead and die in the identity of A, another man, B, a lesser man, in my opinion. And then I wrote, can I believe in a cause that is bigger than my own personal identity or pride? Patroclus so believes in the cause that he is willing to swallow his pride, take his orders, and die his death while being tormented as an order-following dupe. And then the final question I have, is Patroclus the testament of the second man concept?
Yes. Yes.
And how long could we talk about that?
A long time. I feel like he has awareness that in order to operate as the second-hand man, you don't do that with blind loyalty, but you do that with the awareness of who you are. You know, one of the things followers have, in addition to blind loyalty, we talked about that they don't have blind loyalty, but they have a loyalty that's based in grace and understanding. But the second thing they have is self-identity. And I think that's so important for followers who are going to be good second-hand people, that they have self-identity. They know who they are. They know the unique contributions they bring to bear on the kingdom of God. And I feel like he had self-identity, so it wasn't a loss, but that he was operating, as your question infers, as a great second-hand man.
You know, I never heard anybody ever talk about that very much except you. And when I came here, I don't remember where it was. I know it was in my office at dinner one night. Mm-hmm. But you launched into first man and second man. And I don't know, Andrew, that I have ever been more uncomfortable at the start of a conversation as I was that night, just because it was a foreign idea to have someone in your team just openly start talking about that concept. And it was staggering to me. Like I've thought a lot about the humility, the dignity, though, it takes you to just openly talk about that. And I see, to a degree, in stories, hopefully not with me and you, but I see you in the pages of this story at times saying, no, I could be offended like you have been offended or like others have, but I have a self-awareness, an emotional intelligence that I'm not going to be rocked from my core value and lose my equilibrium. I see a great man in Patroclus, not an order-following dupe. You know, and I just think at that point you could look at this man and ask so many questions, especially like, you know, I can just go on and on and on, and I'm not going to do that because we have to move to the other book. But he says, you maniac, you obeyed. Like, how many saints have heard taunts that you pay tithes and this is what they do with your money and you do this and this is, they don't care, you know, and yet those saints remain loyal and faithful and ignore the taunt of the hectors in their life. That is an amazing center of gravity when someone can do that. And it's not easy because there is a certain rationale to what Hector's saying to him. But as Achilles is offended in Agamemnon, I think Patroclus had more reason to be offended at Achilles and showed us what the high road looked like. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. The fact that there was a no-fly zone is interesting in of itself. You can go into battle, you can do your 27 men, but there's one prize you can never achieve. And yet, even in that, he still went into battle. Even though there were these no-fly zones, there were these things, again, that we could talk about Achilles. And I don't want to be so hard on him that we only see the negative in him. But, again, the ability of Patroclus to compartmentalize that and realize that the cause was greater than anything that his leader had put on him in regards to those no-fly zones. It's... maybe David is the best example biblically of that person, that when spears were being thrown at him, the ability for him to compartmentalize that and to just duck, right? And still to believe at the core of his being, he could have believed, I hope Saul dies. Not so that he could take over the reins, but the fact that he couldn't even envision that there was not a punishment due Saul, that he was willing to compartmentalize it to the degree that his self-identity and his calling to God was greater than anything he experienced at the hands of Saul. It's incredible. It is incredible.
It makes you have such huge value for people like this. Like you look at that and say, okay, so David was the greater man. And when you read the Tale of Three Kings, you're constantly inserting yourself. Where would I have been? What would have I done? How would have I reacted? Yeah. And you have this huge admiration for people who can take a wrong without delivering one at the same time. And that those people don't get memorials. They don't get, but to me, Patroclus is the greatest hero of the book, in my opinion, because he dies a selfless man. And in ways you can see even a type of Jesus. There were certain no-fly zones for him. You're going to go down, for one, marriage, procreation, living. You're not going to get to do any of this. Exactly. Not my will, but thy will be done. You know, there could have been so many moments of why, you know, and yet he submitted to it all. You know, it's just to me, a beautiful story in followership. Yeah. And it deserves a lot of time that we're not giving it to discuss and unpack and I'd love to do a follow-up episode on the second man concept and how respected they should be and how valued they are. And from the conversation you and I had, it's that way now, where before I was just kind of antsy about it and wanted everybody to just be a first man at what they did. And when you came and talked and said, no, it's not, I see it differently, it was eye-opening to me. Anything else before I move in this last little segment? Okay. All right, book 18, Menelaus, and book 17 wades in. He is one bad hombre. He whoops everybody to bring back the body of Patroclus. He doesn't actually bring back the armor of Achilles. They get it. And so Achilles now has another excuse for why he can't fight. He has no armor. So it's just like, you just want to grab the guy and think, you brought all this on yourself. If you'd have been wearing your armor, you wouldn't have lost your armor, and now he can't mourn his friend properly because he's mourning the loss of his own armor, which sometimes is a hard leadership deal, because am I mourning the loss of dignity or profile, or am I mourning the loss of this person or this person's dignity or profile? And it kind of get all muddled up there with Achilles.
There's a thing for me in this, is that the analogy for me is that, notwithstanding him possibly trying to create a mini me by giving him his armor, but in the positive sense of it, him giving him his armor so that he essentially gave him, you know, when they saw him on battle, they assumed it was in fact Achilles. So he had gifted to him some of that. The thing for me, though, is for leaders, and we talk a lot about succession, and, you know, success and succession go together. And this idea of, as I pour myself into people in my care, and I give everything I have into them to build in them so that they will develop and become great leaders in of themselves. There's a point where when you've given everything and they now, if you will, possess all of this capability that they then have synthesized into their own capability and added their own capability to them, that all of a sudden there's a potential vacuum that as a leader you have to be highly cognizant of, because I pour myself into these individuals and ultimately I see them achieve, hopefully, greater works than these.
Right.
I see them achieve more than I have achieved in my lifetime. And that feeling of vacuum is something that all leaders, I think, face, and they have to say, how do I recreate value, or how do I continue to create value in a different way? Now that I don't necessarily have people in my care, how do I create additional value? And that, to me, was the analogy that came out in this, is that I've given of myself, and they have now possessed this great gift, and it leaves me in a vacuum, but I can't stay in that vacuum. I have to continue my development without the armor.
Yeah. Or in Achilles' sense, he starts asking for new armor.
Yes.
And there is a sense that all of us as leaders go through this metamorphosis as we recreate ourselves every so often.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? That even the man that I was a few years ago, I'm not that man anymore, right? So as you give away things, you're recreating, right?
Exactly.
And I think there's this sense of, if you're going back to me to what I've already given away, you can't do that, right? So this tension is really played out in what you're talking about with Jesus. So Jesus, he goes and he's buried and he's raised from the dead, and the women come to touch him, and he says, "Don't touch me. I haven't ascended to my Father." Thomas comes and he says, "Go ahead, stick your hand in."
Yep.
Thomas is wanting proof of the resurrection. The women were reaching in sentimentality for the past to be secured.
That's fantastic.
And so Jesus is saying, no, you can't touch me because I'm not what you think I am anymore.
Right.
Right? I go away and I'm going to come back and I'm going to be something new to you.
Yeah.
You're wanting to touch me for what I used to be to you.
That's fantastic.
Right? So in this sense, there has to be a bit of recreation in leadership, and Achilles doesn't really do that in book 18 right away. He starts crying and whining and moaning, and it's exaggerated, so much so that the gods are like, "Oh, please, come on." And then somebody calls his mother over and says, "Will you go talk to your nursing child?" Like, it's bizarre how whiny this guy is, right? And so Achilles, you realize, is now putting on this big show. And again, I'm bashing Achilles because he's not my favorite guy, right? He's putting on this show of overt mourning, ostentatious grief, right? Because he's mourning what he didn't do, right? So he has to go overboard. So I remember at a funeral I was at, and I was watching the family, and I was watching some that were extremely connected and close to this person. And they're standing there at the coffin, and they're patting, and they have tears, they have grief. I'm not minimizing, but they're not like wailing. But you look at the ones who had divorced them, or you look at the one who had, ran away and caused them great grief. And I mean, they are over there just falling over and needing smelling salts, And you're like, how much is our reaction based not on what has actually happened, but what our role was or wasn't in it? Yeah. Have you seen leaders that go overboard in certain areas because they abdicated certain responsibilities previously?
Yeah, you look at the mourning. It was a loss of what could have been,
right?
Not a loss of what it became. But yes, in leadership, of course, you see people who have failures that express those in very overt terms, versus the awareness of knowing where they had gone wrong. I think all of us make mistakes. All of us have, I don't love the word regrets. I try not to use the word regret. All of us have reflections of where we could have done things differently. But when it becomes such a moral failure, that's, to me, and I feel like Achilles here has not had a outcome failure, that he felt like we didn't achieve the mission or the goal, but I think he's come face to face with what is a moral failure on his part and on his leadership.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I think Achilles' mother, Thetis, would agree with you. And she says as much when she's talking to him, that you're not just mourning what's happened, you're mourning what could have been. Interesting thing relationally and maternally is Thetis shows up, and she's really, really involved in Achilles when he starts this ostentatious wailing stuff. But as soon as he starts to talk about why he's hurt, she's like, shut up already.
That's true.
So she doesn't want to hear
Yes.
what's made her son this son that she has. She just wants the crying to go away. Mm-hmm. And so we're not reading the book. We're not on Homeric parenting, but it's there. It really is. So anyhow, it's strange, but Achilles, his grief turns into this rage, stoked, heated, billowing rage against Agamemnon. He will not take responsibility for Patroclus's death. And so there's this tension there that it cost him his life. It cost him the life of his best friend, and yet he still won't take responsibility. And so when you say all of us have, as leaders, look back and say we could have done things differently, there are those who simply don't play the game, and they're the ones that seem to desperately need a scapegoat. And so what do you do when you're a leader and you know that it's kind of a bit of a moral failure, or it's a bit of an abdication of responsibility, and the urge to find a scapegoat is there? What's one way that I can check that in me as a leader?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there with the word. It was an abdication. That, and I don't know if he ever believed it, but in my understanding of leadership, there is absolute accountability, and that you have to take absolute accountability. It was an interesting, I talked to a guy that was on my team in an organization, and he worked on a submarine. And it reminded me of a story, and I asked him, I said, regards to the story, I said, when they make the announcement that the SS St. Louis has, and they sound the alarm that the SS St. Louis has taken leave, I said, what does that mean? Does that mean that the boat is actually pulling out of harbor? He said, no, what it means is that the captain has left the bridge. And there's this interesting association that the leadership and the command of that boat is so synonymous with the boat that when they say that it has left, what it means is that the person in charge has left the command. And I think as leaders, we have to have this sense of absolute accountability, that the buck stops here, to use an old cliche. And I think that's what he lacked, is that ability to say, and so to your question is, what do you tell leaders? Do you embrace the idea of absolute accountability? If there's a failing, where does the failing happen in the way that you trained your people? Where is the failing the way that you didn't communicate what the vision was? Where was the failing and they weren't clear on how they could be successful? These are all requirements of leadership to be able to communicate that effectively. And where there's a breakdown of execution, or where the outcome is not achieved, then there is an accountability that falls upon the leader.
And holding a leader accountable, and obviously I'm not talking about saints holding pastors accountable. No. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just talking leader to leader, holding leaders accountable. One of the things that I think is the most helpful in doing that is to just refuse to accept excuse making as a standard policy.
Yes.
We all have excuses, but none of that excuses us.
No. Accountability is absolute. If I have to do a presentation and the screen doesn't work, I don't do the look around for the sound man. I say, Andrew,
yes,
why were you not here early enough to check the sound?
Right.
Was there some dereliction of duty on behalf of the sound man? Sure, maybe there was. It sounds like my training program wasn't very good then, right? The accountability falls on me. If I didn't get there early enough to check the equipment, how do I blame the sound man for not having the equipment, right? This is that concept of absolute accountability that leaders, I believe, have to embrace.
Yes, and to your point, he is called by Hector, Achilles is called the most terrifying man alive. Okay? But then in the next line, Achilles broke in quickly. How can I go to war? The Trojans have my gear. I love it. And my dear mother told me I am not to arm for battle, not till I see her coming back with mine own eyes. She vowed to bring me burnished arms and shields of the God of fire. I know of no armor. Whose gear could I wear? It doesn't fit. He goes down through this whole deal, okay? And then, quick as the wind, Diomedes, who is just like spot on as a leader, says, we know. We too saw that they hold your famous armor. Still, just as you are, go out to the broad trench and show yourself to both the Trojans and Argives. For presence is leadership. That is
genius.
Yeah. Swing. There's the ball. How do you get leaders to understand? When I pastored 25 people, I used to walk to the pulpit every week and say, this is the biggest small church in the world. I refused to embrace smallness. The tools I had or didn't have didn't matter, right? So we're down there around Brother Buxton, Brother Booker at the time, 300-400 people in his church. And somebody approached me, and if they're listening, I love them. I'm not demeaning or whatever, and said, look, we're starting a group that's all of us small churches in the area. And if you're one, and I had 23 people in my church at the time. I said, man, I'd love to. Back when I was small, I would have joined, but I'm not. It's just in me. I'm not inculcating small into my church, right? Leaders don't wait until they have the perfect budget and talent and music and equipment to say, now I will go out and do something for God. Leaders lead, right? What can we do to cultivate an atmosphere in our own leadership here in Truth Church that you don't have to have everything perfect, but you do have to lead? And if you're lacking tools, we'll get you tools, but that doesn't mean you set it out waiting for the perfect tool.
I wish I could be more profound. I think what you said is exactly it. It's a mindset. Like, leadership is leading, and people have to embrace that leadership is action, that there are no excuses. You can't say, I'm waiting for this, I'm hoping for that. Hope's not a strategy.
Right.
Leadership is leading. So I don't even have an anecdote. I wish I'd love to have some pithy story to give you, but it's just, to me, it's so obvious that leaders have to lead. We're not waiting for something to happen. We're creating something. That's what leaders do. They create something. They don't wait for it to happen. They create something.
That's so true. That's so true. Well, we've got so much more to go and so little time. So I'm just going to let you wrap it up. Whatever you feel, any point that we didn't touch in book number 18, and I will try to get you back later on, and we'll continue a few of these because there's a few things I want to come back and cover on. Anything you want to touch on before we shut this episode down?
Not necessarily in book 18, but I have a fundamental belief that leadership matters. That whether it's a church or an organization, they rise and fall on leadership. And that the calling of leadership is one of the greatest callings of life. That when you take that yoke, when you embrace the idea that leadership is absolute, and that there are people in my care that I'm responsible for, that I'm committed to, it is such a high calling. And we talk about being a inspirational leadership. And I think we could look at the etymology of that word and understand inspiration, but I think for most people, they would say, I want to be an inspirational leader. I want to be that person. And to me, what it reflects is it's waving of the hands, it's big presence, it's taking up lots of space. That's not what inspiration is. When we inspire, we are drawing in. Just like when we expire, we are releasing. Inspirational leadership is about people who are concerned about what they're ingesting in order to develop themselves, develop their ministry so that they can give back to people and that they can grow people. And so if you want to be an inspirational leader, be a person who's aware, who's cognizant, who's disciplined around what am I ingesting? What am I reading? What am I talking about? Who am I talking to? What am I doing in order to build my capability so that those people in my care can be better for the kingdom of God?
That is so good. That is so good. And it's one of the kind of brilliant parts of you. There's a bunch of them, but one of the most unique things is that you live that stuff. You're not just reading and, just spitting back books and quotes. You really do live that. And that's what I appreciate about you. I love you, and I'm so thankful that you did this with me, and I'm looking forward to doing some more.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching through 5 episodes of this. I know this is a little bit off the normal spectrum of what we do and how we do it, but one of the things that always piqued my interest is Jesus told me in the book of Matthew, don't be like the Gentiles. This is how the Gentiles lead. Well, if you don't know what the Gentiles were, they were the Grecians. They were the Persians. So historically, I think I'm doing some follow-up research and a homework assignment that Jesus gave me a long time ago. So thanks for doing my homework with me. It's been great having all of you with us and walk through Homer's Iliad. It's a hard read, but it's worth your time. And if we could offer just a little bit of adhesiveness to the story where you can get some tactile tackiness to it and stick some thoughts on it, maybe it'll be easier to work through and look at. But it's interesting how people lead, and I agree with you that churches rise and fall on leadership. And I'm thankful for that, and I want to be a better leader, and I want God to help me be a better leader. Thank you all, and we'll talk to you next time.